أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. So today we'll be discussing an interesting character by the name of Ibn Tiqtaqa. We're going to speak about Machiavelli, early Islamic institutions, looking at government and taxation and administration, and the classic political thought in medieval Islam by Erwin Rosenthal. So I will first and foremost begin by discussing Ibn Tiqtaqa. So, not a lot is known about his life, and right, so we can look at a note by Toynbee. I didn't even know existed, apparently. So, you can check this out quickly. Right, so it's a fairly long blog. We'll ignore this for now. But yeah, Ibn Tiqtaqa, his real name was Safiuddin Muhammad ibn Ali ibn al-Tabatabai, also known as Ibn al-Tiqtaqa, was a historian and naqib of Aliyan in Hilla. So he was essentially what you would call a Shia, right? And naqib means naqib means leader, head chief, or representative of Aliyan in Hilla. So Hilla is a place in Iraq. Okay, interesting fact there. And as we progress here, seriously, you don't have time for this. Right, so maybe it's here. No, again, misguided me. Right, so he was a direct descendant of Hassan ibn Ali, according to Brown's English version of Mirza Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Qawazni's edition of Ala ad-Din Ata Malik al-Juwani, Tahri Jahan Ghusha. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa name was Safiuddin Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Taba. Around 1302, he wrote a popular compendium of Islamic history called Al-Fakhri. According to the political scientist Vasilios Syros, the philosophy of Ibn Taba can be compared to that of Niccolo Machiavelli. So what we're going to do is look at Syros's claim. Okay, just give me a second here. Right, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, chapter 10. Soft and hard power in Islamic political advice literature. The recent spread of violence and acts orchestrated by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, which we know is a scumbrel creation in both the Middle East and Europe, have led to renewed debates about violence as an intrinsic aspect of Islam, conceived of as a religious or cultural institution founded on values, principles, and ideals different from or even to diametrically opposed to and irreconcilable with those prevailing in the West, Although violence has been a persistent feature in the political life of many Muslim majority states, Islamic political discourse on the nature, scope, purpose, and limits of legitimate rulership is characterized by a high degree of sophistication. A considerable amount of medieval Islamic treatises of political and ethical advice, for instance, are devoted to the origins and manifestations of dhulm, a term loaded with a constellation of meanings associated with representative, tyrannical, illegitimate, or arbitrary rule, and the ways in which a ruler or minister or a government official can avoid tampering with his authority and crossing the thin line that separates righteous and salutary government from malfeasance and the misuse or abuse of power. While one could possibly argue that the medieval Islamic political tradition never articulated a full fledged or powerful doctrine about the right of disobedience, resistance, or rebellion, the deposition of an unrighteous ruler or tyrannicide is compared to those formulated by Latin Western European authors such as John of Salisbury and the monarch, monarch Max in the 16th century France. In 16th century France, in Islamic political writing on the illegitimate use of power and violence is almost unequivocally condemned as an anathema to the existence of a peaceful, just, and prosperous society and a stable civil order. So there is much contention in the Muslim world today concerning the concept of disobedience to the ruler and how to challenge the status quo, how to challenge a ruler and his authority over you. So we see today, for example, in the Arab countries, any type of resistance equates to imprisonment, whether it's from a religious sermon, whether it's a religious sermon, or whether it's some literature you publish, or just doing a podcast online. Instantly, you are imprisoned. Similar case at the moment in England and America, but it's masqueraded and masked as freedom because certain elements you cannot question and speak about, like events from World War II, the tiny hat Talmudic demons, you cannot challenge these things. But in Islamic political writing, according to Siros here, there is unequivocal, meaning there's no univocal, unanimous agreement on how to go about protesting and resisting. Alhamdulillah, all good, my brother. Jazakallah khair. Please do message me. I'm based up north now, I'm not in the London area. On the other hand, although the notion of human nature underpinning Islamic political thought is very different from that of the Western tradition colored by Augustine's doctrine of original sin, Muslim political authors are not oblivious, meaning they're not unaware, to the importance of the application of physical force, not only in warfare, but at the domestic level, especially when dealing with malefactors, evildoers, and agencies attempting to foment factionalism and disorder, subvert the political order, and engineer political and social fragmentation. I like how he's written this. So we see this in during the Khilafah of Ali alayhi salam. All the battles and wars he conducted were against his own Arab Muslimin. And it's a long, painful history, but in short, there's a reason Ali is revered more than Yazid and his predecessors Muawiyah. So at the end of the day, if I was in the battlefield and I was to choose between Ali and Muawiyah, 100% will be going with Ali, no doubt. Because there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim 240, Sahih Muslim 240. Nobody loves Ali except for a moment, and nobody will hate Ali except a hypocrite. And these are the words of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, of course, we take his words over any author or any scholar or anyone else. So, a notable specimen of early Islamic literature dealing with these questions. So, when it comes to opposition to government authority with these questions is the work of al-Fakhri, roughly translated as On the Systems of Government and Muslim Dynasties, written by Ibn al-Tiqtaqa. So he's the one we were speaking about earlier, Ibn Tiqtaqa, and he was from Iraq. He was the head of the Ali faction in the 13th century BC, and his book has not been translated since 1947. So one of my projects is to at some point fund and get this project off the ground because I do not like it when non-Muslim Western Orientalists lens are put on when translating these important works. Yes, of course, they have the right to offer their opinion as long as it's thorough, honest, and comprehensive, or even brief. But why is it that Ibn al-Tiqtaqa is not talked about as much as Machiavelli, for example, or anyone else in comparison? So, a low-ranking government official in 1701-1302 during a sojourn in Mosul for the local ruler Fakhruddin Isa ibn Ibrahim. Al-Fakhri is a richly documented history of various Islamic dynasties and a neglected but highly interesting source of insight into the dynamics of effective political action. The objective of this chapter is to offer an analysis of Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's ideas on the on the interface of a benign or benevolent style of rule with the application of violence and the criteria for the legitimate use of force. I argue that at a deeper level, al-Fakhri's projects a favorable image of Mongol rule contrasts forcefully with the denunciation of the Mongol invasion that occurs in many of the works of Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's contemporaries, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, and is partly embedded in the endeavor to diagnose the factors that led to the erosion of the Abbasid imperial power and ultimately provide a cautionary tale inspired by the failings and depredations of Abbasid rule and ailments of Abbasid society. Depredation means an act of attacking or plundering. Additionally, this chapter is the first sustained attempt to look at the medieval Islamic ideas on good political leadership from the viewpoint of recent debates on soft and hard power, and look at how and to what extent Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's theory can be incorporated into a broader narrative about Islamic and Western European ideas on violence. The interface of soft and hard power forms an important strain running through Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's interpretation of Islamic history and his exposition of the principles and components of successful leadership. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa shares a set of concerns with Niccolo Machiavelli, a more widely recognized political writer who a few centuries later theorized the configuration and delicate balance between soft cooperative and hard command or coercive power, represented by love and fear in Machiavelli's lexicon, respectively. By using Machiavelli as a template to look at Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's ideas in comparative context, this essay aims to add historical depth to present-day discussions about leadership and ultimately revisit and interrogate certain ideas about Islamic exceptionalism that have long distorted the study of the evolution of Islamic political thought. Interesting. Let me read this one more time. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa shares a set of concerns with Machiavelli, a more widely recognized centuries later configuration between soft optive, co-optive, and hard command coercive power, represented by love and fear in Machiavelli's lexicon, respectively. By using Machiavelli as a template to look at Ibn Tiqtaq's ideas in a comparative context. So now this is a comparative analysis and a breakdown that's about to begin here. So I think it's imperative that I do take notes. Very fascinating to say the least. Right, so Ibn Tiqtaqa and Machiavelli. Machiavelli. Right, so the idea of soft, cooptive, and hard command or coercive power. Cooptive means obedience, if I'm not mistaken. In political science, co-optation, adjective co-optive, refers to the process by which a ruling group or institution absorbs opposition figures, social movements, or rival ideas into its existing structure. The strategy aims to neutralize threats, maintain stability, and expand the regime's support base without ceding actual power or making fundamental policy changes. Okay. Subhanallah. I was thinking about Eric Erickson earlier. Insane. How come he's here? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, check this out. Okay, so by using Machiavelli as a template to look at Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's ideas in a comparative context, this essay aims to add historical depth to present-day discussions about leadership and ultimately revisit and interrogate certain ideas about Islamic exceptionalism that have long distorted the study of the evolution. Right, so he's of the opinion, so he's using Machiavelli as a template to study Ibn Tiqtaqa. Okay, why is he doing that? To understand the evolution of Islamic political thought as it's been apparently been distorted by Islamic exceptionalism. Exceptionalism. Okay, so before I begin, let's check something out quickly here. Right, okay. So modern perspectives on soft and hard power. This is going to be very fascinating because I glanced over this briefly and yeah, so yeah, we'll see that. Bismillah. Sorry, just give me a second. No, no, still. If it stops, you refresh and press play. I'll be done in 1 hour. Okay, apologies for the slight interruption there. Okay, so we are going to move forward. Just want to change the mic settings. Okay, I think this here is, yep, fantastic. Okay, so modern perspectives and soft and hard power. The distinction between soft and hard power has been proposed by Professor Joseph Nye of Harvard in the context of his endeavor to dissect the various leadership styles, skills, competency related to modern democratic societies and organizations. Hard power, according to Nye, entails a coercive component embodied in police power, financial power, and the ability to hire and fire, all of which are instantiations of command power that can be employed to compel others to change their positions and operate through inducements or rewards, carrots, and threats, sticks. Hmm, interesting. Okay, soft power, in contrast, entails determining the framework and delineating the parameters of a debate and then appealing to, attracting, and co opting others without payments or threats. Soft power entails determining the framework and delineating the parameters of a debate and then appealing to, attracting, and co opting others without payments or threats. Soft power requires the capability to mold the behavior, attitude, and preference of others by inducing them to strive for the same things as the leader and leading example. So this is my opinion, probably looking at the seerah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his personality and how he handled things politically and as a statesman. Which reminds me, there's a book specifically talking about this that I have. There's another one which is written by ex-army general, I think from the British Army, obviously a bunch of terrorists. But let me just see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. So, prophet and statesman by what? All right. So very quickly, let me just see if he talks about leadership here. Let me see here if he talks about it. Okay, yeah, no, he doesn't really speak about this topic. It's more of a biography of his journey as a prophet rather than a leadership being the central focus. Okay, so these are references I think which are nice. We can look at here. The line, highlight that. Nye believes that leaders in authoritarian regimes can exercise coercion and force and issue orders and commands. Statesmen in democratic settings rely more. Sorry, Nye believes that leaders in authoritarian regimes can exercise coercion and force and issue orders and commands. Statesmen in democratic settings rely more on the right mix of inducement and attraction, and in this regard, soft power constitutes a dominant feature of daily democratic politics. Co-optive or indirect power behavior, which aims at shaping what others want and aspire to, is founded on the attractiveness of one's belief, values, and goals, or the capacity to set an agenda of political reference and choices. These choices derive from assets that are often intangible, for instance, an attractive personality, cultural principles, and moral authority. Soft power ought not to be equated with persuasion or the ability to move people by argument. Although these are crucial aspects, more importantly, it signifies the capability to entice, attract, because attraction often leads to acquiescence. Imran Khan, Trump, many actors fit this description, in my view. Following Max Weber, Nye distinguishes three ideal types of authority: traditional authority, under which one person follows another because the latter is a ruler, king or emperor by right of a traditional process such as heredity. Rational or legal authority, which is exercised by a person who acts as a president, director, or chair and has been appointed through an election process or rational criteria. And a charismatic authority, under which one person follows another because the latter embodies a gift of grace or radiates exceptional magnetism. Hmm. Yeah, the idea of selecting a Khalifa is not like this at all. So I guess we will highlight this pink. According to Nye, there are various manifestations of personal attraction. People can find others appealing thanks to their intrinsic qualities and the effect and impact of their communication. At the heart of Nye's notion of soft power lies the concept of charisma, construed as the emotional or magnetic equality of inherent attraction. Right, that's a nice way of putting it. At the heart of Nye's notion of soft power lies the concept of charisma, construed as the emotional or magnetic quality of inherent attraction. Charisma is a special power by virtue of which a person can engender fascination and loyalty. Charismatic leaders are often portrayed as being self-confident and animated with strong convictions and enthusiasm, which they infuse in others. They also have the ability to manipulate symbols as insignia of power and success. Let's read this one more time. Insignia, distinguishing badge, emblem, or within rank office. Charisma is a special power by virtue of which a person can engender fascination and loyalty. Charismatic leaders are often portrayed as being self confident and animated with strong convictions and enthusiasm, which they infuse in others. They also have the ability to manipulate symbols as insignia of power and success in order to generate emotional attraction. The strength of charismatic leaders derives from personal and inspirational power resources rather than power associated with an official status and position of authority. Strength of a charismatic The strength of charismatic leaders derives from personal and inspirational power resources rather than power associated with an official status. I'm rereading this because Toynbee points to this in a way that I'm trying to remember here. The strength of charismatic leaders derives from personal and inspirational power resources. The strength of charismatic leaders derives from personal and inspirational power resources rather than power associated with an official status and position of authority. Okay. Charismatic leaders are adept at communication, vision, and confidence. They serve as a model and manage the impressions that they create. Hmm. Al-Nai's attempt to address the interplay between soft and hard power is program is programmatically confined to the sphere of liberal democracy. Yeah, that's exactly what I mentioned earlier. The intent of this present paper is to assess the applicability of this distinction as a conceptual tool for exploring evolution of Islamic thought, political thought, focusing on medieval Islamic ideas around the relationship between diverse leadership strategies designed to sustain and conserve political power or royal authority on the basis of personal charisma, on the one hand, and the application of violence or deployment of military power on the other. This is the new territory, given that Western scholarship has traditionally ascribed a certain degree of exceptionalism to non-Western modes. The new territory, given that Western ascribes a certain degree of exceptionalism to political theorizing regime forms, often precluding their application. Nice interplay of soft and hard power are confined. What's another word for confined? Not limited, binded by, limited to, substantiated by, crowned, compact, type, squeezed, incommodious, straight, yes, incapacious, constricted. Yeah, I think that's a nice word. Constricted to the sphere and sphere of liberal democracy and its diverse applications. Applications. Right. Programmatically, nature of or according to a program, schedule, or method. Of the nature are constricted to the nature and sphere of. Okay, this is new territory. Soft power in Islamic tradition. Soft and hard power in Islamic tradition. The distinction between soft and hard power employed by Nye in his endeavor to dissect the mechanics of political power and complexities of leadership is prefigured in one of the foundational texts of Islamic advice literature, the Kitab al-Adab al-Kabir, a treatise on courtly conduct by Ibn al-Muqaf, and further discussed by Ibn al-Tiqtaqa and Ibn al-Muqafa. Sorry, just highlight this quickly. Ibn al-Muqafa. Let's see if the English translation of this exists. Right, so let's go through this. Ibn al-Muqafa, Kitab al-Adab al-Kabir is a seminal mirror for princes that merges Sasanian political wisdom. These were Iranian, right? Dynasty Persia, third until Arab conquest of 6th. Political wisdom with the evolving social dynamics of the early Abbasid Caliphate. The treatise is anchored by three central pillars. Number one is the rational mind, aql, the foundation regulating behavior and choice. Governance, siyasa, pragmatic, statecraft, self-control, and court diplomacy, mutual moral preservation, social loyalty, and strategic alliance. The ultimate anchor, reason is the foundation of adab, refined conduct. Ibn al-Muqafa argues that intellect must master a person's whims and desires and overindulgence. Instrument of judgment. An elite individual or leader must cultivate up through continuous self-examination to achieve intellectual maturity and prudence. Hilm. Practical manifestation. Rationality is not merely abstract. It is a practical tool used to weigh the long-term consequences of actions, manage court risks, and select skilled officials. Governance and statecraft. Siyasa. Pragmatism over idealism. Unlike later, deeply religious political texts, this work leans towards realism. It provides a gritty look at the absolute power dynamics within the caliphate. The paradox of power. Ibn al-Muqafa warns court companions Julasa to brace for the ruler's erratic temperament. He famously notes that the air of power may endow the tongue with words that do not carry the real meanings. Interesting. The leader's self-control. For rulers, governance requires rigorous self-discipline. A king cannot govern a state effectively if he cannot govern his own tongue, anger, and ego. Hmm. Interesting. Beckham Suleimani. Okay, interesting. So he has Islamic perspectives often hard power versus Nye. The Western conceptualization of power popularized by Joseph Nye separates power into hard power, coercion by military economic sticks and carrots, and soft power, cooperative attraction via culture, political ideas, and policy. Classic and contemporary Islamic statecraft offers a distinct contrast to Nile's liberal democratic framework. Joseph Nye's liberal democratic view. Primary source. Material appeal, secular culture, and democratic ideals. Islamic statecraft perspective, divine legitimacy, moral authority, and tawheed. Hard power, quwwah, seen as separate, purely physical tools of coercion, bound by strict ethical law sharia. Military action is a last resort to establish justice, not dominate. Soft power, voluntary action, cultural alignment, and ideological emulation. Rooted in moral example, uswa, spiritual integrity, and communal care. Ultimate goal, advancing national self-interest and establishing global hegemony. Establishing a just societal balance, other, and cultivating collective human well-being. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so key conceptual clashes, the secular sacred divide. Nice soft power depends on cultural capital and political policies that are perceived as legitimate by foreign publics. In contrast, Islamic soft power is rooted in the intrinsic appeal of religious justice, public morality, and the preservation of human dignity, karam. The purpose of co-option. Nye views co-option as a subtle tool to make others want what you want, to serve your geopolitical objective. Islamic thought rejects such this as manipulation. Instead, it emphasizes da'wah, invitation via moral excellence, and nasih, sincere counsel to align societies with universal moral truths. Smart power integration. While Nye advocates for smart power, the strategic mixing of hard and soft resources, Islamic thought integrates these concepts naturally through adab and siyasa. The ruler has soft attractions such as mercy, generosity, and consultation and shura as a default baseline, reserving hard power strictly to restrain tyranny. Characteristics of co-option. Philip Zelznick. In sociology and organizational theory, Philip Zelznick defined co-option as the process of absorbing new potentially threatening elements into an organization's leadership or political structure to protect stability and survival. Threat to organizational stability. Formal co-option publicly appoints outsiders, signals structural legitimacy, shifts not actual power. Informal co-option yields quiet real power, satisfies specific groups, and keeps deals behind the scene. Selznick outlined two primary forms of co-option in his landmark study on the Tennessee Valley Authority. Formal co-option, the catalyst. This occurs when the legitimacy of an organization or governing body is threatened or when it needs to establish a structural relationship with an alienated group. Mechanism. The organization publicly appoints outside representatives to official boards or leadership roles. The power dynamic. No real authority is shared. The outward appearance of participation is used to absorb criticism, build public trust, and compel the co opted group to share responsibility for the organization's decisions. Informal co option. The catalyst. This occurs when an organization faces. Hang on, this doesn't make sense. Formal co-option. This occurs when the legitimacy of organization only is threatened or when it needs to establish a structural relationship. Power dynamic. No real authority is shared. The outward appearance of participation is used to absorb criticism, build public trust, and compel the co-opted group to share responsibility for the organization's decisions. Informal co-option. The catalyst. This occurs when an organization faces pressure from specific organized interest groups that hold the actual power to disrupt its operations. Should the catalyst faces pressure from mechanism of the organization. Some society. Okay, right. Let's move forward from here. Ibn al-Muqaffa, a seminal intellectual figure of the early Islamic period who served as a secretary Khatib of various Umayyad officials and later of the Abbasid dynasty, composed a number of translation of Persian works into Arabic that were instrumental in the dissemination of ancient Iranian, Indian, Greek political ideas in the Islamic world. Interesting. According to Ibn al-Muqaffa, the ruler in the administration of temporal affairs can employ two approaches. One operates with force, allows him to solidify his authority. The other embellishes his power by enhancing his popularity and securing the people's goodwill and allegiance. Force is, at least at the outset, more expedient and preferable, whereas the latter helps the ruler make his power sweet, appear benign, and induce and cultivate fellowship. That is exactly what it is even today. Ultimately, however, Ibn al-Muqaffa argues both types of political conduct are inextricably intertwined and feed into each other, since force emanates from popularity and vice versa. An interesting corollary of Ibn al-Muqaffa's pragmatic approach to the art of rulership is the notion that religion constitutes one of the main tools of soft power.
Incendiary.
Incendiary. Okay. Will provide an action. Responsible for use as action. In this paper, speech that provide the universalist character of Islam allowed Iranians to appropriate the ideology of their conquerors to the extent of turning it against them. They made Islam their own. The intellectuals excelled in knowing and using the language of the Quran and the conquerors in Arabic. Writings are attributed to 8th century Persian Khatib Ibn al-Muqaffa and the biographical accounts about him giving intriguing insights into this intricate process. They reveal ambiguous interactions between conquerors and vanquished Arab-Iranian men of power, political intellectuals, as well as Islam dualist religious. So by his birth and education, Ibn Muqaffa belonged to the privileged intellectual elite of Islam, the second society serving the even more advantaged political military leaders. He was prominent author of early Arabic prose, so renowned for promoting the ideals and interests of his social stratum that he became the literary embodiment of those ideals. He and his peers integrated elements of the Arabic and high provide the superior administrative statements describe the system of ideal by the support. It is impossible to determine the absolute certainty, the degree of authenticity of the writings and to do the so viewers personal experience repetition will control will copy the picture which follows the dialectic submission of all mutual integration that shaped the intellectual history of the early centuries following the Islamic conquest. We look after career and image. Okay, so he was a Persian. Ibn al-Muqafa. Okay, historical identity. Khudaynam. Khudaynama. Book of Kings. Gabriel Oprah, Yesh, the National Australian Muslims. Sierra, Hayim, so, no, so his analysis duh, 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 focuses maybe on 8th century traditional culture, Hawaii Nama. Okay, right. So there's a lot going on here. Let's go back to where we were. Right, so Subhanallah, I feel like we may not touch on the books mentioned earlier, but this essay in and of itself is quite fascinating. So al-Muqaf, Ibn al-Muqafa formed the groundwork for subsequent discussions in the Islamic traditions that encapsulate the distinction between soft and hard power in the context of the relationship between the pen, the learned man, and the sword, the military. It's given a reference here, 17. Further discussion and interpretation of the conflict between the pen and the sword and the literary debate see Jan van Gelder, The Conceit of Pen and Sword on an Arabic Literary Debate, Journal of Semitic Studies. 1987. Interesting. Literary debate is a genre of long history of Near East European, Sumerian, Akkadian, Egyptian, Aramaic, Syriac, Middle East, New Persian, and Arabic. It seems likely that from the Near East it spread into Greek and Latin through medieval Latin into various European languages. Ewell Wagner, in his fundamental study of the genre of Arabic, arrived at the conclusion that the genre was developed independently in perhaps two literatures. The earliest debates known to us are in Sumerian, to which ultimately almost all of the developments can be traced. The only possible exception, according to Wagner, is probably Arabic. Für das Arabisch lässt sich ein Autoton Andachtung und Anschwicklung wahrscheinlich machen. Wagner admits, nevertheless, that on the one hand, Greek ideas and modes of thought, rather than direct literary borrowing from Greek literature, may have played a part in its development, and that on the other hand, the possibility cannot be wholly excluded from the Arabic literary debate. Too is in debt to the ancient precursors through the mediation of Middle and New Persian. Wagner's conclusion that the autochthonous origin and development in Arabic seems plausible based on two arguments. It must be shown first the dependence and borrowing. Seems interesting. University of Groningen, that's in Netherlands. Still alive. Wow. What? Okay. Let's go back here. Actually, lost this stuff. Right. Must be shown that dependence and borrowing are unlikely. Second, that an independent origin is possible and likely. Autoch, autochthonous, or autochthonous, indigenous, rather than descended from migrants or colonists. Wagner's conclusion that the autochthonous origin must be shown dependence. Second, that independent origin is possible and likely as the former. Okay, this goes into the whole thing, which we don't need to look at. So we highlight that. Okay, so Ibn al-Tiqtaqa, good leadership. This is, I think, very relevant. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa's political theory is rooted in a long tradition of writing in Islamic tradition about the relationship between the study of history and government. What was the sociologist's name again? Selznick. Selznick's. What do you say this is? Selznick's two forms of co-option, and studies the Tennessee Valley Authority. Tennessee Valley Authority, right. Fortunately, I need to leave soon, but we will finish what we can here and continue the rest tomorrow. So let's read up to this section. I think that will be fair. Some of the very first specimens of Arabic prose literature sought to ground ethical political wisdom in a historical framework. These works include fictitious correspondence between Aristotle and Alexander, translated into Arabic most probably by Selim Abu al-Ala, secretary of Umayyad Hisham. Okay, and Ibn al-Muqaffa's translations such as Kalila wal Dimna, a collection of animal fables and stories that were originally written in Sanskrit under the title Panchantra, five discourses, and translated into Old Persian Pahlavi in the 6th century and encapsulated various pieces of practical advice about the conduct of government and the moral edification of a ruler, as well as the Tansarnama, letter of Tansar. Ibn Miskawiyya, a secretary, a librarian, and an author of numerous philosophical historical treatises, witnessed the decay of Abbasid caliphal power and the apogee of the authority of the Buyid military overlords. Now, this is another character that's coming in the picture. Apogee. What does apogee mean again? Highest point in the development of something, climax, culmination. Of the Buyid military overlords. So we can see reference number 21. According to Muhammad Arkun Muskawiya in EL12, the correct version of the name of the include Ibn Muskawiya in Sakri, so that the version with Ibn is probably more correct. Okay. In his preface to Tajrib al-Umam, Experiences of Nations, a narrative of the history of the world from the flood extending to 982, anticipated subsequent usage of episodes and examples of virtues and vice from Islamic Persian history in the context of competent leadership. This actually reminds me of what Toynbee states that we read yesterday, where he said that how Arabian and Iranic societies merged and there was this exchange. So this is a nice connection I'll add. Toynbee on Arab and Iranian societies and intellect, intellectual exchange. Okay. He contends that by studying the histories of various nations and the lives and deeds of distinguished rulers and past models of behavior, he learned about events that recur in similar ways as well as about how to respond to such phenomena and manage contingencies. In Ibn Miskawayh's view, historical works are a valuable source of political moral lessons because human history is determined by common patterns such as rise and fall of states and kingdoms. Relevant to all this are policies intended to promote the prosperity of countries, secure social cohesion and harmony, engender goodwill among armies, and reveal tactics employed in warfare and machinations that were successful or failed. Miskawiya, written as Ibn Miskawiya and Tajrib al-Umam, Volume 1. Leo Caetani, Zaki on the history are discussed in Muhammad Khan studies in Miskawiya contemporary history. Bakhtiyar Hussain Siddiqui Miskawiya on the purpose of historiography. Muhammad Arkun, ethics. On early Islamic history, historiography in general, see Chase Robinson Islamic historiography. Okay. Islamic historical writing. 8th, 10th centuries outside of historical writing. Conrad, Islam, the Arabic traditions, 11th, 15th centuries. Interesting, okay. Andrew Marshall, Universal Histories in Christendom and Islam. Tayyib al-Hibri, Reinterpreting Islamic Historiography, how she the narrative of the past. Tarif Khalidi, pre-modern so in the classical period, Albrecht North, the early Arabic Islamic tradition is also critical study in collaboration with Lawrence Conrad, Abdulaziz Al-Duri writes historical writing among the Arabs. Frank Rosenthal, history, Muslim historiography, the usage of introductions in Arabic writing is discussed. Thus, Volvo Smith Literarisc form indoor Arabisk in literatur. Like Ibn Miskawayh, Ibn al-Tiqtaqa suggests that historical learning is beneficial to both young and old, to those who aspire to leadership as well as to scholars, and those who wish to serve as the age advisors, companions, or rulers. In preface of Al-Fakhri, Ibn al-Tiqtaqa promises to investigate the circumstances of various dynasties and political affairs, drawing on material related to the lives and deeds of distinguished rulers, caliphs, and ministers. His work is divided into two sections, the first of which includes ruminations on the requirements for vigorous royal rule and the attributes that set a skillful rular apart from the common people as well as his duties toward his subjects and vice versa. Second part features historical narrative on the emergence of a decline of various dynasties from the time of Khulafa Rashidin to the Abbasid. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa observes that a profound knowledge of history adorns rulers more than it adorns the common folk. The most useful subjects for a king to engage with include the principles of government, biographies, and historical material that contains remarkable stories and anecdotes. Al-Fakhri, page number 3. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa professed aim in al-Fakhri is to offer an exposition of the characteristics of good leadership and political organization that will be indispensable to rulers and administrators in the hope that people will recognize its value and urge their children to learn it by heart and mediate on its content and ideas. Ibn al-Tiqtaqa explains that his goal is not to elucidate the genesis or ponder the nature of power, religious and temporal leadership as exemplified by the caliphate, sultanate, emirate, governor, and the like, whether sanctioned by divine law or not, as well as interpretations of the jurists concerning the imamate. Rather, his primary objective is to deal with the various types of systems of government, norms, conventions that are useful in current affairs, in the rule of subjects, the security of the realm, and improvement of manners and conduct. Okay, interesting. This is in page 14. Find it here. Right, so we've understood the objectives and aims. Inshallah, we're going to stop here. Next time, we will discuss this in a bit more detail, and inshallah, we'll break down certain theories from what was his name again? Selznick, Nye, see what they have to say. Till then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Maslam. Allahu Akbar al-Kabira, Subhanallah, Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh.